When I was 14 years old, my mum showed me a picture of a boy and told me I was to marry him. I had no choice, no voice, no way out. I actually didn't even know what was happening to me, but this is how I got engaged at the age of 14. This was nothing like the romance novels I had loved reading as a teenager. Getting into bed close to midnight after a full day of school, chores, and homework, I would escape into another world. I dreamt of a hero, tall, dark, and handsome, sweeping me off my feet to live happily ever after. The reality was quite different. My siblings, an older brother and two younger sisters, and I were raised by parents who had moved to England in their childhood and had recreated an oppressive Orthodox Punjabi household in the city of Bradford. We were to be decorative, quietly doing our chores, staying in the background. Our thoughts, our hopes, our wishes were unimportant. We were not allowed to date, as our marriages were to be arranged. One day, a big and turbaned Sikh man came to visit. He had a mustache that curled up at the corners and spoke in a loud, bellowing voice. Every time he came over, we had to be on our best behavior and show him how domesticated we were, quickly preparing tea for him and serving it with snacks. This time, he and my mum talked softly, looking over at me occasionally. After he left, my mum came over and showed me a photograph of a boy and said, "He's a nice boy. You're very lucky to get a chance to marry this kind of a boy. He is good looking and very well educated. What do you think? Do you say yes?" Saying no was not an option. She would have slapped me and scolded. "Who do you think you are? Your friend got her wedding arranged and she didn't object to marrying the boy from India. What's so special about you? What makes you so different?" I was 14 years old. My mum was very strict. We could not even leave a dish in the sink unwashed or in the dish rack. We lived above our grocery shop, and she would yell when she came upstairs and found us sitting down watching TV, annoyed and looking for a chore for us to do. If we stepped out of line, we were put in the cellar for punishment or slapped. This is why I knew I could not argue with her or say that I didn't like the picture of a boy or I didn't want to marry him. And I didn't know what I was saying yes to anyway, as marriage was also foreign to me at that age. Within a week or so, the boy Satinder was in England for his brother's wedding and also to meet me. He came to Bradford. I was told I could only say hello to him and to sit next to him quietly. This stranger put his arm around my shoulders when we posed for pictures with his family. I didn't realize the significance of the proceedings, but apparently that was my engagement party. Satinder was just an average-looking boy, 3 years my senior, and not at all like my mum had described him. My family were all happy, but I had no voice. What happened to the romances I'd read about in the books? There seemed to be no hope for me, as I was not allowed to have the same dreams and aspirations as those characters. We went on a 6-week holiday that following summer to Punjab, India, where we stayed with our relatives. We visited Satinder's village, and there was a big party. We met his parents and the rest of his family. Again, I got to say hello, pose for pictures, and had to be polite. I realized that this was another engagement party, and I was a guest of honor. This trip to India was to buy clothes and jewelry for my wedding. I thought this was a holiday, but really, it was a business trip, the business of engagement and arranged marriage. When I was 17, I had applied and been accepted into college in Leeds, but my mum forbade me to attend, reminding me, as I was getting married soon, there's no need for further education. "He's been waiting to marry you since you were 14. You have to make an effort and call him or write to him, poor boy." So I enrolled in a government work training program where they taught secretarial skills and then gave us job placements. The impending marriage was coming up, and I was running out of time. I didn't want to get married, but I couldn't tell my family, and I couldn't speak about it to anyone. I felt guilty at the thought of hurting my family, but I knew I had to run away. One day, soon after I turned 18, I took a taxi from near our shop, bought a one-way ticket on a bus to London, and escaped. I had never been to London. I didn't know anyone there, and especially didn't know where I was going to stay. During the entire 5-hour ride to London, I was petrified that they had discovered that I was gone and might be following me. I had about £5,000 savings from making samosas and from the job placements. I stayed in a cheap bed and breakfast in central London until I found a small room in a house as a paying guest. The next few weeks went by in trying to settle in, find odd jobs, and get my bearings. I was in London for about 2 months in total, and I absolutely loved it there. I experienced freedom. I could leave a cup in the sink and not worry that I was going to get locked in the basement or get yelled at. London was magical for me, and it still is. I feel like a piece of my heart has always been left in London, as it's still where I yearn to be, just because it gave me the first joys of my life, freedom and happiness. Despite my love for my new life in London, I was homesick sometimes and decided to call my family to let them know I was okay. My mom said, "Your grandma is really ill. She's not doing that well. We've been so worried. Please come home." I decided to go home for a visit to see her. I know what you're thinking. Big mistake. And yes, it was. My grandma was just fine. I recognize it now for what it was, a trick, emotional blackmail. The pressure and guilt were put on me to marry Satinder. How are we going to tell everyone you don't want to get married to him? He's been waiting all this time. His brother and sister-in-law think of you like a sister and love you. You can't do this to them. It was all a blur, and I felt defeated. I began thinking that if I just went through with this marriage, I could escape from that too, that it would be easier to escape one person than it was to escape all these who were now watching me so closely. I was sent to Denmark to stay with the matchmaker's family. My family joined me after a few weeks for the wedding with someone I had no common ground with, not even language. I didn't speak fluent Punjabi, and he didn't speak any English. At the wedding, my mother was elated. No one seemed to notice my misery as they were all celebrating. So many people flew in from England, and there were celebrations going on for about 3 days total. There was dancing and all the girls getting together the day before to put henna on their hands in readiness for the wedding in the Sikh temple. On the day of the wedding, I remember the apartment was bustling with activity. There are some details that I can't remember as I have blotted them out. For instance, I know I wore red bridal clothing as is customary in Indian weddings, complete with gold jewelry, but I can't remember if I wore a sari, if it was a long skirt with a top, or a long dress with baggy pants. I know I went through the ceremony almost as though I wasn't there, that my body was there, but my soul was somewhere else, and I was like a robot going through the motions. I felt removed from the whole event, and I don't even remember my actual wedding ceremony clearly. I've blocked out the wedding night, but have more recollection of this than the actual wedding ceremony, as this is when I had to deal with him one-to-one, with no escape. We went on a sham honeymoon to Venice and Rome. I was very unhappy and told Satinder upon our return to Copenhagen that I didn't want to be intimate with him and slept on the sofa. He was disappointed, but somehow agreed. I told him just 2 weeks after the wedding that I didn't intend to stay in the marriage and I wanted a divorce. When my dad came for a visit just 6 weeks after the marriage, I conveyed my unhappiness and unwillingness to continue the marriage. He suggested that we just need some more time together. Then he and my husband went out to a bar to drink. Soon my husband returned home alone and drunk. He said he was mad at being denied his rights as my husband for so long. He told me I was bad and that if he couldn't have me, no one else could either. He then told me he had every right to have sex with me and that I was going to succumb to whatever he wanted. He started strangling me and slapping me hard. And I knew instinctively that if I did not give in to his demands, he could hurt me more. I apologized for hurting his feelings, that I would do whatever he wanted, that I would not leave him, and had made a mistake. he relaxed his hold on my neck, but proceeded to force me to give in to him and to serve his sexual desires. Through the whole violent act, he said I had to start listening to him, act more like a wife, and try harder in our marriage. I was crying and assured him I would, begging his forgiveness. He was rough and still angry with me, and I was petrified his violence would escalate. I was shocked, violated, and frightened. This monster had just raped me. I told my dad, when he returned from the bar, that my husband had just raped me, had strangled me, and he was going to kill me if I didn't give in to his demands. I don't want anything to do with him, Dad. He only said, he's your husband. He has every right to do that to you. I couldn't believe that my own dad would not protect me. He was the only family member I had in this foreign country they had sent me to, and I felt betrayed by him. They treated Satinder more like a son, as boys traditionally are considered more valuable, and I believe they were trying to give him the respect they thought he deserved as their new son, even if it meant not having the same respect for their own daughter. My dad made my choice to leave very easy, as I had to get away from them, from my evil husband, and from the dad who refused to protect his daughter. On the pretext for making tea for them, I grabbed my bag, and on that same night of the rape, walked softly, opened the door quietly, and ran down the 100 steps to the street and to freedom. Again, for the second time in my life, I was running away. Again, I experienced the same fear as I took a taxi to a friend's house. I wondered if my dad and my husband had discovered that I was gone. I stayed in Denmark for over a year and then spent a year in Australia. My family disowned me after I left Satinder, and it was almost 2 years before I saw or spoke to them again. My heart aches for my 14-year-old self. I wish I could help her now and tell her to be strong and say no. I was robbed of my childhood, as I wasn't allowed to play outside with my friends, go to movie theaters, or hang out in the town center with them. Instead, I was trained to be domesticated starting at age 7 for a life of serving a husband and his family. When my mum found out last September that I'm speaking up about this, she stopped speaking to me again. But I'm not going to stay silent, which is what she wants. Now, I have a voice.
VAMP first-timer, Davinder Kaur.